The poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote that hymn or poem in the middle of the Civil War. Longfellow actually wrote it on Christmas Day in 1863 after his son, who had enlisted in the Union's cause, had returned home seriously wounded. The verses you might not hear over the speaker at Walgreens in the coming weeks speaks of his despair, of hearing the promise of peace on earth, goodwill to all, when the evidence of the world is otherwise. I heard the bells on Christmas Day, their old familiar carols play, he wrote, and in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said, for hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep, you sang this morning. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fall, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to all. The poem was written by a broken father for a wounded son. And in Longfellow's journals years later, he said, I have only one desire, and that is for harmony and a frank and honest understanding between North and South. A song written from the despair into the hope of the season. A story. The setting is 12 years ago in Chicago's largely black community of North Lawndale. A high school student, who we will call Janice, is sitting in her class when she receives a text that her brother was involved in a shooting in their neighborhood. In shock, she stands out and walks out of the school into the snowy world of Chicago, lit by Christmas lights, only to find that her brother, who she teased that morning about not eating his waffles, is dead. North Lawndale, a charter school located in a gang territory of West Chicago, in 2009 had 458 murders in that neighborhood, more than the number of U.S. soldiers killed in Iraq or Afghanistan. Janice, in shock about her brother's loss, the night before had stood with him at the window of their apartment to hang their stockings. Janice, Jacob, her parents. Her brother told her he was going to get her a pet rock for Christmas. She gave him that look. They laughed. The night her brother died, she sat in the living room staring at the window. Should she take the stocking down? Leave it up? What is Christmas without Jacob? After the burial and the holiday break, Janice's teacher took her aside one morning. Mrs. Childress, her science and civics engagement director, told her, you know, the level of violence is not normal. I've seen other neighborhoods in Chicago where young people getting shot is not part of the daily reality. She said, even 50 years ago in this neighborhood, we didn't have this kind of violence. She asked if they could talk to the class, and that is how the movement started in that school. Janice and others joined Miss Childress in learning about Kingian nonviolence, coming from the work of Dr. Martin Luther King. Childress organized a 5-day training for a group of student leaders chosen by teachers. These were the first North Lawndale Peace Warriors, students who would lead their peers in creating a culture of peace in their school. They practiced role plays that involved scenarios where the school cafeteria broke out into a fight. Just when the conflict was about to boil over, the trainers would stop and the actors would pause and they would ask, what happens next? They learned that one of the most important tenets in Kingian nonviolence is to suspend your first judgment. Maybe the second boy meant no harm. Maybe the first boy was having a difficult day in his family. The two would end up being good friends, possibly. They talked about how we are always taught to distrust people, to assume the worst first. Having students think through possible nonviolent responses to conflict made them realize that they already understood how to de-escalate conflict. They just needed to get creative and they needed to practice. You see, Martin Luther King believed that nonviolence is not passive, but a proactive force that can defeat violence and injustice. And it's not about teaching people to turn the other cheek, but about teaching people how to confront the forces of violence and injustice in their lives and create a real and lasting peace. It is, as King put it, the antidote to violence. With the support of the school president, the students formed around these ideas. They built a common vision to build toward, a common language. They drew up posters of the 6 principles of Kingian nonviolence. They plastered the school with them. The Peace Warriors wrote PSAs that were played over the school PA. Each year, the freshman orientation included Peace Warriors introducing all the new students to the philosophy. Every year, the faculty was trained, and the Peace Committee, composed of Peace Warriors and faculty, provided lessons each week in the assemblies about nonviolence. And the school started to track days of peace with a large public calendar that marked each day and offering student incentives for consecutive days with no fights. And the students took ownership of their community and began keeping the peace themselves. And so the peace extended to families and the community with marches and gatherings, and the violent rates of murder and conflict in North Lawndale started to come down. They were still living under the crisis of receiving text messages in class of a family member who had been shot. They still didn't have enough heat in their homes or not enough food to eat. And they worried that under those stresses, some might not be able to hear the message of peace and nonviolence, but they kept at it. Because they learned that the beloved community is a framework for the future, that by raising the level of relationships among people where people attain a full human potential, in that reconciliation can come to life. They learned these tenets, that to attack the forces of evil, not the people doing the evil, was the beginning of it all. They learned to accept suffering without retaliation, without turning their own pain on others. They learned how to avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external violence by techniques that calm the heart, that look like meditation and prayer. They learned that the universe is on the side of justice, the truth that the universe and human society and every human being is oriented to a just sense of this universe at peace. Here, King borrowed from the 19th century Unitarian minister Theodore Parker, who stated that vision that the universe bends toward justice and is necessary for us even to try. Because of the Peace Warriors at North Lawndale High School, the school removed metal detectors and security guards. And with the savings, the school created new programs to take their students out into the wilderness and learn more about nonviolence. The beloved community is possible, the leaders of the school said. It's just a matter of adults believing in our children and adjusting the resources accordingly. Our inability to be peaceful in our school has larger social implications, they said. Our failure to understand peace is a form of enslavement, they said. we have to invest in peace. And it gets better. To invest in peace, the school realized it needed to develop restorative justice practices to deal with the conflicts that did arise. The nonviolence training taught them that punishment can cause emotional harm to the perpetrator as well as to those who receive the violence. That a perpetrator can increase their anger and their pain when punished, and the system fails them. And so punishment was taken away. Instead, reconciliations were the way. The adult leaders now say in the school, at the end of the day, we have to have high expectations of our children. We have to have faith that they can resolve conflict in humane ways. We have to have standards for academics as well as for humanity. On the anniversary of the death of Janice's brother, she had become a peace warrior. She had worked through reconciliations and restorative justice events in her school, in her community, and when she took Jacob's stocking out of that messy box of Christmas ornaments that we all have, she knew something akin to Longfellow's cry that we sing for peace and no peace exists, except when we create it. As she hung the stocking on the window, slipping a rock into it just for fun, she knew peace, even momentary peace, was possible because she had become an agent of peace, the kind her brother would be proud of. Why am I telling you this long story of an experiment in another city that sounds almost impossible? Because as we enter this time of year, we hear songs calling us to peace, and we feel more like the prophet Jeremiah, who cried, "Peace, peace," when there is no peace. He warned that Babylon would destroy Jerusalem while the false prophets claimed that all would thrive. I feel a little like Jeremiah as I walk through stores blaring the Christmas songs of peace on earth, goodwill to all. The season claims peace will be upon us, yet everywhere we look there is anxiety and violence. In conversations with our teenagers about school shootings, and in Facebook posts of our elected leaders with their children in front of Christmas trees holding machine guns. Peace seems impossible to imagine, and all around us we are told we must have it, or we will have it. When we hear the poet youth from other lands proclaim, "O God, there is so much pain, very little to cheer. The outcome of war is tragic, sad, and full of dreadful possibilities," we know what they mean even without being in war-torn places. And yet we also hear, in the middle of agonizing violence, youth write words like this: "From the fruit of every tree, from every breeze and every wind, who among us does not love peace? Who does not want to see peace all over the land and skies?" And we hear stories of peace warriors, those who can claim it as theirs. So I have news for you today to spread far and wide, dear Unitarians. Spread it from the rooftops and the tops of your social media reports, on your front lawns next to those inflatable snowmen, and to your neighbors. Tell them all that Jesus is not the reason for this season, nor is the reason to buy a new car or toys that your children will not use or the blender you've been dying to give your spouse. The reason is a deeper human urge that rests in all people all over the world, no matter their religion, creed, or lack thereof. The reason for this season is to allow stories to help us reset our intentions for the world, to remind us that even against all odds, peace can happen in Tehran and Damascus, in North Lawndale, in our communities, in your family, in your life, and in your heart. The reason for this season is the reason John Lennon stayed in bed with Yoko and proclaimed, "Why don't we give it a chance, peace?" Or like the band, the Foo Fighters sing, "It's times like these you learn to live again. It's times like these you give and give again. It's times like these you learn to love again. It's times like these, time and time again." Because this season doesn't call us to adore a baby Jesus born 2,000 years ago. It calls us to be our best selves over and over again. It calls us to be peace warriors, not soldiers for Jesus. It calls us to be agents of peace, to answer the long and enduring call within humanity to reset our family fights with gifts, to help our communities with giving, to be part of a restoration of not only our world, but of our hearts. The reason this season has Jesus at all is because of the reason of the season that asks us to reset ourselves for peace. You get what I'm saying? The reason for this season is upon us. It is why we do all this, because it urges us toward wholeness and hope and peace, time and time again. Can I get an amen?